These are the scriptures here. I'm gonna ask Phyllis to read the scriptures for us, and then we'll get into discussion. You all probably could pick up already what we're gonna be talking about. But Phyllis, are you able to go? Are you able to see the scripture?
Yes, I am. Revelations chapter 3, verse 16. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. And 1 John 2, 15, 16. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world.
Okay, all right, thank you. Folks, I'm going to mute your phones because we're getting some background noise. So if you need to talk, just come off of mute. Just give me a second here, because we do want people participating. So that's not to stop from people from talking. Okay, all right. I'm going the wrong direction here. Okay, so we heard the scripture here. Obviously, we're talking about lukewarm. So in Revelations 3, who is the one doing the talking in that verse that she read?
Jesus.
Okay, does everybody agree that it's Jesus that's talking? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, Jesus said he's talking to the disciples.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, it is Jesus, and no, he's not talking to the
Talking to the
disciples.
disciples. He's talking to everybody.
Okay.
But in particularly in this verse, though, who is the message going out to?
It's to the Laodicean church.
Absolutely, Hazel. That's correct. He's talking to the church in Laodicea. So he's talking to the church in Laodicea, and it is Jesus that's speaking. Remember, he's talking to these 7 churches. So what does it mean to be lukewarm?
You're not there nor here. You're neither where, one or the other.
Okay, not here or there.
It's
Anybody else?
nowhere in the middle.
Hold on. Okay, well, who was speaking?
Well, I gave that answer. That you're neither hot nor cold. You're just in between, and you should be one or the other.
Okay, does everybody agree with that? The definition of lukewarm?
You're on the fence.
Yeah, you're in between.
Okay, you're in between. So you're in between these two extremes, hot and cold. But what is a lukewarm Christian?
One that's undecided, really.
Yeah.
Does everybody agree with that?
It's one that's one way on Sunday and another way when he gets out of church.
Let's go back to Emma's definition for a minute. One that's undecided. What do you mean by undecided, Emma, and what?
Well, he may be following along with some of the principles, but hasn't quite decided to give himself completely over to Christ.
Right. I agree with Emma. I think that it's someone that has confessed faith and hope in Christ, but they are not applying it to their lives. So they're not walking in his way.
So I think part of that is correct. But one of the things that I'm hoping that we get out of this discussion today is a lukewarm Christian is a Christian.
Yeah.
So the question isn't about their Christianity. So when we hear talk about lukewarm Christian, most times we think, well, maybe this person didn't really get saved. But that's not what Christ is saying here. Because he's talking to the church, right? So that means those people are believers.
Yes.
Okay, so then we can't question their salvation if they're believers. Then the question becomes, then what is he talking about?
I think what he's talking about is not the fact that, they don't believe. It's the fact that what are you're either going to be in or you're going to be out. Either you're going to, walk with me or you're not going to walk with me. who you gonna believe.
Well, you know, the kind of taken from a commentary, part of it saying is that the Laodiceans were relatively wealthy
Yes,
and had no need
there you go.
necessarily for God. So it's kind of touching on the
Right.
fact where things are going good, we don't call on God, but when the bottom falls out, we're on our knees fasting, praying, and doing everything we can to call on the Lord to get an answer.
So that's
We need you now.
so Chauncey hit the nail on the head there, because that is the point that he's making here. This church was a wealthy church, and as them being a wealthy church, they figured that they can do all that they needed to do on their own.
Right.
They weren't calling on Christ.
Like the old preacher used to say, if it wasn't for bad luck, you wouldn't have nobody in church.
That's about right.
Anyway.
So for the Laodiceans, why would they prefer hot or cold over lukewarm? Why would this so significant for this particular church?
What was the question?
Could you say that again, Mike?
For the Laodiceans, why would they prefer hot or cold over this lukewarm that been talked about here? Why would they prefer hot or cold? And why is Christ using this analogy for this church? So let me just that's sort of a loaded question here. The Laodiceans, if you know anything about this church here, it's set in a region where the people around them in the surrounding towns had hot water, and some of them also had cold water. But by the time it got to this area, it was lukewarm, so it wasn't very useful. And if you're gonna drink hot water is useful for things, because if you're sick, you can use the hot water. Or if it's cold, you can use it for you're thirsty. But what do you use lukewarm water for?
Take a nice shower.
Lord says yeast.
Yeast. Okay. I don't get that analogy, Lois. I don't get the yeast connection. Okay, so now I what I did before, I sent out in advance a case study. Now this case study is a facetious situation, so it's not based on anybody real or anything like that. Even though Phyllis said parts of the man behavior in the case study resembles me. But this is a made up story here. But I wanted us to read this case study because based on what we know about lukewarmness, then I want us to have a discussion here about the behavior in this marriage here. Let me bring up the case study for those that weren't able to get it in advance. We'll read it in your hearing now.
While he's getting that up, I was just saying that Michael was supposed to finish a project that he didn't do. So I just want to clarify that.
Oh.
Okay.
Phyllis, that means Michael is typical.
Ready for me to read, Michael?
Yeah, also, by the way, Phyllis, I forgot to tell you, I did give you the right to record if you wanted to record.
We are recording today. I started on time.
Oh, okay.
I wrote a note to myself. I didn't want Charles to fire me this Sunday.
Right. And before you start reading, when I read the story, I thought it was my story. I'm like, okay.
It is a facetious story. I made it up, so it's not based on anyone. But first, you want to read the case study?
James and Jillian were a happily married couple recently celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary. James owned his own business as a certified public accountant. Jillian was a stay-at-home mother looking after their two young children. It being tax season, James, as a CPA, was very busy at work. So much so that he was now bringing work home to keep up. James and Jillian recently learned that Jillian's parents would be coming in 2 weeks to stay with them for 3 months while they were having work done on their home. In preparation for his in-laws' upcoming visit, James anticipated that he needed to do significant work on the spare bedroom. The spare bedroom was currently being used for storage and required repainting due to some fire damage from a house fire the previous year. James had chosen to pocket the insurance money with the intention of doing the repairs himself. However, because the heavy workload at work, he had been putting it off for some time. Now he would need to find time to repaint and recarpet the room. James circled Saturday on the calendar and told his wife that he would need to devote his entire Saturday to preparing the guest room. Upon his arrival home from work on Friday evening, James was met with some unexpected news. His wife told him that she had decided that her and her neighborhood friends would work on restoring the guest room on Saturday, but she would need him to run some errands for her while they worked. She had made arrangements for the neighborhood teenagers to watch the children. Although the list of errands was long, James thought it was a bargain considering the amount of work required to fix up the guest room. He thought he could wrap up the errands in about 2 hours compared to the 12 to 18 hours required for the guest room. When Saturday arrived, James and Jillian sat down and ate breakfast. She told him that she expected her friends to start arriving around 10 a.m. So James figured he would start on his list of errands early so as to be out of the way when they arrived. True to his estimate, the list of errands consumed most of his morning. When he arrived back home around 11 a.m., he could hear his wife downstairs in the guest room. She had music playing and he could hear laughter from her friends. He decided not to disturb them. Given how busy he had been at work recently, James thought that he would give himself a treat and go to the golf range. Working off a few rounds would be his reward for recently carrying such a heavy workload. He changed clothes and headed off to the golf range. Several hours later, he came back home and still heard his wife and her friends making a celebratory noise from the guest room. Still not wanting to disturb her, he went to his home office to catch up on work. Several hours later, James realized he had been working for almost 5 hours nonstop. It was now close to 9 p.m. When he came out of his home office, all the lights were off in the house, and he realized that Jillian had gone to bed. The next morning, James and Jillian awoke, and because they busy eating breakfast and getting the children ready for church service, they didn't really have too much time to discuss how things had gone with the guest room. Later that day, after service and a late lunch, they arrived back home. Still, Jillian was upstairs changing and getting the children's changed. James decided he would examine the progress his wife had made with the guest room. To his horror, when he opened the door to the guest room, he realized that very little had been done. Some items had been boxed, and someone had started to paint part of one of the walls. However, the room still required a great deal of work, and with the weekend now lost, Jim was concerned as to when he would now have time to work on restoring the room. based on the case study above, who is in
No,
the,
no. You
oh,
last paragraph, Phil.
huh?
You didn't read the
Of
last
course.
paragraph. Of course, James expressed his frustration to Gilliam, and the discussion became a major sore point and distraction to their harmonious home life. Gillian is responsible that she had helped out, and James was being unappreciative. Now, the question is, if Jesus had given this couple the assignment to restore the guest room, who would he be displeased with and why? That's the case study. So does anybody want to weigh in on what sort of response Jesus would have if it was him that had given this assignment?
But who did he give it to?
If he had given it to the couple?
Well, I think the husband is mostly at fault because he was being cheap. You know, he had a busy tax practice or accounting practice. He knew he wasn't going to have time to finish everyone else. He just wanted to take the money and be cheap about it. He should have paid somebody to get it done.
Right.
Okay, so most think that it's the husband's fault. The husband's
Yes.
fault.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
what about the wife?
I
I
think,
thought they had poor communications. First of all, because the wife had solicited the neighbors to help. The husband didn't know that. So the fact that that they were going to come and help, he may have determined that there were certain things that maybe they weren't qualified to do, and there was no way they could have the room ready in time. So I think it was poor communications on both of their part.
Okay, so Hazel said it's both of them
I
should
agree.
have blamed.
I agree.
Christ would be
I would agree
displeased with
also.
both, according to Hazel.
I would agree
I-
also with Hazel, a little bit different, but I think that I would agree both of them responsible because if both of them had a requirement to make sure it gets done.
Right.
And because of lack of communication, because of lack of planning, because there's a lot of things why they didn't get it done. But the
Right.
bottom line was both of them had the requirement to get it done, and neither of them made sure that it would be done. So I think in this case, whoever hold them accountable, if it's God or Jesus, then he would hold them both accountable.
Okay, so these are very good answers
I
that
agree.
you all gave. Oh, does somebody else have a comment?
Well,
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mother Emma.
Chairman.
I kind of thought maybe they might have been well off if they had prayed about it before they got started for some direction. That might have helped them get on the right page.
If they were well off, they would have hired a contractor to do this from the very beginning.
But he had the money to hire a contractor. He got
He
the
had the
insurance
money, but
money.
he just didn't
Oh,
use
But
I
he
it.
didn't.
Indeed.
That
What
was
would
a
you-
while ago.
Yeah, what were you saying, Maisha?
No, I was gonna say, I agree with Hazel and with Harry. I think they would both be at fault because they both knew that they had a task that needed to be done and that the parents were coming into town. They didn't sit down together and plan with one another. So initially, it's both their faults.
Okay, so
I have a different spin on that, Michael.
go ahead, Phil. What's your different spin?
Because I read it twice, and I'm sorry about the last paragraph, but you must have added that after I copied this. Anyway,
Okay.
anyway, I've read this and reread this. God gave the husband the responsibility as the head of his household.
I agree.
Now, he chose to do the job, and that's why I said to you what I said to you after we had some repairs done here. He chose to use the money for something else, but God holds that man responsible for what God told him to do. Now, and he decided he would take that money and put it in his pocket. He had a whole year in which to get that job done.
Okay, all right, but so
And
keeping,
so,
Can I say something too?
yes.
No, I mean, on that aspect, I agree with Phyllis too. Because initially he knew that he did have to get it done, but honestly, I don't think he really wanted to do it. To be perfectly honest, you see how quick he was to say, "Ooh, I'll take this job where I could go get the shopping done,
Right.
and I'll do the shopping," and that was so much easier for him to do. And he was like, "My work is done." So he was like, yeah, I'll let somebody else do it. And he quickly gave it and put it into somebody else's hands so he wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. So
Okay,
yeah.
so these are all really good answers.
And instead of golf and going to golf, he could have gone and helped them too. So
Exactly, really.
I have another,
like a new wife. Go ahead, Cassandra.
I would like to say that it seems like they didn't know one another very well. If they have been together for 20 years, they should have known each other. That it'd be one thing if they had been like 6 months, a year, and they really hadn't felt each other out and known each other.
He
but
should have known.
Within 20 years, he should have known that wife wasn't going to get it done. And in 20 years, she should have known that he was who he was too. And so, although I would say she is the helpmate. So if it is busy tax season and she knew that, he had that on his plate, she should have gone back, and even though she was a stay-at-home mom, she might have felt like, I don't have that much power to make decisions and go ahead. But what's his is hers, and in the marriage. So she should have just gone ahead and moved forward and took direction and did what she had to do to get it done, because at the end of the day, they're both going to look kind of simple that, they're inviting the family there and they're not prepared for them to come, unless it also stated that the parents were going to come in 3 months, and maybe he didn't want the parents to come to stay for 3 months.
But Cassandra, he had a year to fix it.
Okay, so he had let me bring it back. So in the perspective that Christ would be displeased is this is in terms of lukewarmness. If you had to say that their behavior was lukewarm and that Christ is being displeased because they were lukewarm in their behavior, who would you say exhibited the lukewarm behavior in this marriage?
At the end of the day, I agree with Phyllis. He is the head of the household, and she is in submission to him. So he has to take the most responsibility. But after all, she is the helpmate. So she could have also stepped up and been that Psalm 31 wife and done extra.
Okay, Mike, I'm gonna jump in and say, okay, I get a biblical answer. Y'all keep trying to put on this story, but your word is your bond. What you got to study, you can't sit there and say, I put my word out there, but my husband, I blame him. You can't do that. I mean,
I didn't say I blamed him.
But if you say you're gonna do something, wife, child, dog, I don't care who it is, you say you're gonna do it, you need to be held accountable for doing it. Now, the biblical thing about the head of the household and the father, when we talk, but when you talking about your word and you say, I'm gonna get this done, that's your word. That ain't your husband's word, that's yours. You need to follow your word.
But he assumed a lot. He assumed a lot. He didn't go in there and check. He didn't check in with her.
It's your word. You said you're gonna do it.
Yeah, but he knew who he was married to.
All I can say is that the Lord put both of them out the garden.
Yes.
Thank you, Chauncey. Thank you, Chauncey, for bringing that up. I thought the same thing. Thank you, Chauncey.
I really did have this scenario. And yes, my husband would always be the one who say, I will do it, because in his mind, it is his responsibility. But I decided I will do it because I just felt like I would be the better person to do it. I did do it, and he knew I would do it. But in the same breath, he turned around and checked to make sure I did everything.
Let's hear from Jean, and then I want us to watch a video, because I think this video is going to have you all take a different perspective on this. Jean, what was you going to say?
Just looking at, because I'm looking at this, it says, upon arrival from work, James was met with unexpected news.
Well, he wasn't expecting
his wife told him that she had decided, her and her neighbors.
Yes.
Questioned her and said, what do you mean by you deciding? So, and there should have been a discussion.
So I want you all to keep your answers in mind and watch this video, and then come back after the video and say would you still look at it from the same perspective? Because I think this video is going to give you a little bit more insight into what lukewarmness is all about. Let me bring up the video.
Look at what it means to be a lukewarm Christian. Before we dive into that, would you hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date on what's happening on this channel? This term lukewarm Christian gets thrown around a lot, and often you kind of pick up the vibe that it's not a good thing, but rarely have I heard it explained. So I want to dive a little bit deeper and figure out where we got this term from and what it actually means. This term comes from Revelation 3:16, which says, "So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." Right off the bat, we can tell that's not a very positive verse. But before we can drop.
Hold on, let me put, I gotta mute some phones here because we're getting some background noise. Okay, I think we got the phones muted. I'm sorry.
Conclusions, we need to look at the context in which it's said. When we approach a passage that we want to understand the meaning of, what we need to understand is the original audience it was written to. In other words, we need to understand the who before you can apply it to you. You see, the context in which a verse is said is very, very important, and there's been much harm done by people that just rip a verse out of context and start saying it and quoting it and build their faith upon it. When we ignore the context of a verse, we will often end up with a wrong and sometimes harmful interpretation of what the Bible is saying. So, before we look at what it means to be a lukewarm Christian, let's dive into the context of Revelation 3:16. In the first few chapters of Revelation, John is recording a message from God written to 7 churches. This message is written to real churches in John's day. However, the message isn't exclusive to them. It also applies to us today. Where we find this verse, Revelation 3:16, is actually in the middle of a section where the church of Laodicea is being addressed. In other words, this verse that we're reading is addressed to a real church full of real people that lived at a certain point in history. And so while there's a message in this passage for us, we need to first understand who it was originally written to. We need to understand the original audience before we can apply it to us. In Revelation 3, verses 14 through 22, the church in Laodicea is receiving a warning from God. That's important because often when we read this verse about what it means to be lukewarm, we think it applies to the unbeliever, but really this verse applies to the believer. It applies to the people that are actually going to church. This isn't a warning for those that aren't following God. This is a warning for those within the church, those that are following God. Within this passage is another famous image that you've probably heard, and it's Jesus knocking at the door that comes in Revelation 3:20. And again, we know from the context that it's written that this verse is actually written to the believer, not the unbeliever. That's why context is so important, because if we don't look at the verses surrounding it, we'll often end up with the wrong or sometimes harmful interpretation of the Bible. So, now that we've looked a little bit at the context, what we know is that this verse is written as a warning to the church in Laodicea. This passage is about how believers, how Christians can sometimes become lukewarm in their faith, and the picture that we're given is that God spits them out of their mouth. So now that we've looked a little bit into the context in which this verse is written, we know that this is being addressed to the church. It's being addressed to Christians. So if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, this verse is addressed to you. Now, before we can dive into what this verse means, we need to look a little bit deeper into the church of Laodicea and look at a little bit of the history, because the image that God is using in this passage draws from things that were happening in their area. They lived comfortable lives and they were prideful in their ability to provide for themselves. So much so that when an earthquake came in and nearly destroyed their city, they refused financial resources from the Roman Empire and insisted on paying for the rebuild themselves. This attitude of self-sufficiency spilled over into the church. So you had this church that met together regularly and they thought they had enough. They thought they had it all together. In a blunt but spurred from love warning, God says to them, you don't. You don't have it all together. You're not self-sufficient. You need me. That's where that whole lukewarm comment came from. See, cold water is refreshing, hot water soothes, but lukewarm water is good for nothing. You just spit it out because it's not good for anything. And that's a picture of what the church in Laodicea had become. They had become good for nothing because they were self-sufficient. This image of lukewarm water would have struck a chord with the church of Laodicea. It's no mistake that this is the image God chooses to describe this church. You see, this city, this church, all they had access to was warm water. All they had access to was lukewarm water. They knew what it was like to drink lukewarm water. One of the neighboring cities was known for their famous hot springs, where this water would come out hot and it would soothe and it was good and it was useful. But by the time it got to Laodicea, it was lukewarm and good for nothing. They were so close, but yet so far from it. Another city nearby had cool, refreshing springs of water that would just quench your thirst on a hot day. But again, by the time it got to Laodicea, it was lukewarm and it was no longer refreshing. You see, hot water is useful, cold water is refreshing, but Laodicea had access to neither. All they had was lukewarm water. And what God is telling them is that you are no longer useful to me. You see, hot water is soothing, cold water is refreshing. And when God says this church has become lukewarm, what he's saying is that they're no longer good for anything. They become stagnant, they become useless, which is why he spits them out of his mouth, because they're no longer useful to him. And this image that God gives them is one that they would have been so familiar with, because their whole existence, all they had was lukewarm water. Now, I think it's important to note that this image of God spitting the church out isn't necessarily a salvation issue, it's a usefulness issue. God is saying that he would prefer his people to be soothing like hot water or refreshing like cold water. Instead, they have become lukewarm. They're not useful. But this isn't a salvation issue, this is a usefulness issue. All right, now that we understand a little bit more of the context in which this verse is written, we can dive into the implications and what this verse means for us today. This passage is full of images and pictures that would have struck a chord with the church in Laodicea. And so I want to kind of continue with that and give you some images, give you some pictures of what a Christian should look like, what a follower of Jesus should look like. The first image of what a Christian should be like is like a cold drink on a hot day. Christians should be refreshing. Is there anything better than after you've been working in the yard on a hot summer day that you come inside and you get that cold beverage, whatever it is for you, water or lemonade or beer, and you drink that cold beverage and it just quenches your thirst and it tastes so good. And as you're drinking it, you can feel your life come back in you. You feel refreshed and revitalized. Is there anything more refreshing than a cold drink on a hot day? And this is a picture of what followers of Jesus should be like a cold drink on a hot day. We should be refreshing, restoring, life-giving. The world is looking for that refreshment, but often all they can find is lukewarm water, but we have access to the most refreshing, coolest drink possible. We should be like a cold drink on a hot day. The second image of what Christians should be like is like hot tea on a sore throat. You see, Christians should bring comfort, like when you're sick and your throat is just throbbing and you make that tea and you drink it and it goes down your throat and it coats it and it just brings refreshment and healing. There's just something about that hot liquid as it makes its way down your throat that it brings healing and comfort in the midst of your pain. You see, not only should Christians be refreshing, but they should also be soothing. We don't have to look very far to see the pain and the suffering that's all around us. And the world is desperately looking for that comforting cup of hot tea for their sore throat. And listen, as followers of Jesus, that's what we have. We can provide comfort and healing in the midst of the world's pain. So we should be like a hot cup of tea to a sore throat. The third image of what Christians should be like is beggars. Remember, the original warning of this passage was that this church had become self-sufficient. They had lost their dependency on God. They thought they could do it all themselves. There's great danger when we think we have what we need. There's great danger when we think we got it all together. We need God. You see, it's only through Christ that we can be refreshing. It's only through Christ that we can be comforting. As Martin Luther said, we are all mere beggars, showing other beggars where we found bread. Have you ever seen a full moon? It can be incredibly breathtaking, the beauty and the detail. But the reality of that moon is that it's nothing special. It's simply reflecting the sun. You see, as Christians, we're just beggars pointing towards something greater than ourselves. We can't be refreshing on our own. We can't bring healing on our own. We can only reflect what God has done for us. We're like the moon. We just reflect the sun. We don't have the source for life. We're just pointing towards the source for life. I think the church in Laodicea has a lot of similarities to the Western church today. The Laodiceans enjoyed material prosperity that led them to this attitude of self-sufficiency that they could do it all themselves. And we too, we've bought into this idea of self-sufficiency. We think we're good enough, we have what we need, we can get by on our own. But when we live like that, we run the risk of becoming a lukewarm Christian. And I want to reiterate, this isn't a salvation issue, this is a usefulness issue. Being lukewarm in the context of this verse means that we've lost our purpose. We've stopped being useful. And this is a constant danger when Christians live lives of prosperity and of constant ease. So we have to fight against this. We have to fight against this lie of self-sufficiency and recognize that we are dependent on God. And the second that we give up that dependence, we can no longer be refreshing. We no longer can be healing. We can no longer point those to the life that God has for them. But all hope is not lost. This address to the church in Laodicea ends a few verses later with this famous picture of Jesus standing at the door and knocking and asking to come in. And again, we know this isn't addressed to the non-believer. This isn't addressed as Jesus asking to come into somebody's heart. This is addressed to the church. And what Jesus is doing is he's offering a second chance. He's saying, listen, if you want to be useful again, if you want to be refreshing again, if you want to bring healing and comfort again, I'm here. All you have to do is let me in. I don't know where you are, but if you've become lukewarm, this is the picture of Jesus standing on the outside of your heart, asking if he can come in. He's not going to force his way, but he's offering a better way. He's offering to restore you, to refresh you, to bring healing to you. And he's saying, listen, I will not only do this in you, I'll do this through you to those around you. The question you need to wrestle with is, will you let me in? Thanks for watching this video. I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe and
Okay, so what do y'all think? One, do you agree with what he said in the video? I think he gave a pretty decent overview of the Laodicean church. But as it relates to the case study that we put forth before you all, if this couple was commanded by Christ to restore that guest room, which of them would be behaving like a lukewarm Christian?
The husband.
And why would you say
I'd say both of them.
The correct answer that I see is both of them as well.
I say both.
Because
I say both too.
remember, as he just described, lukewarm Christian is a Christian that has become useless.
Yeah.
They don't. So the wife didn't carry out what she was supposed to be doing. She didn't do anything to help. She became useless in this situation.
Right.
And the husband thought he could do it all on himself. Wasn't that what the Laodiceans was guilty of? They thought that they were self-sufficient. They didn't need any help.
He didn't want any. Yeah. He didn't want any help.
Yeah, they didn't want any help. And the husband said from the very beginning he was gonna do the room. He thought he never once said that, can we work on this together or anything like that. He was gonna take this on himself.
Right. And I think that's why he was that's why his he was when she said that she was doing, that's why it was so unexpected to him.
Yeah, well, yeah, but he didn't mind giving it up, but
right.
The matter is he still at the end, even when he realized the work had not been done, he was trying to figure out how he was going to get it done.
Right.
It was still all about himself.
Nice, you and in the same room or something. I think that's where the feedback is coming back.
I'm sorry, what's that, Harry?
No.
Okay. Something's coming feedback. I can barely hear y'all talk because it keeps feeding back.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let me.
I hear it too.
Let me check the phones here. Let me see if. There are a number of people unmuted, but yeah, they're gonna mute the phones here. If you need to talk, just come off of mute. Okay, so I think when the people that said that both of them would be guilty in this case is more of what I was looking for. Because the wife became useless in the sense that she didn't pull her weight. That's the point Harry was making. She had said she was gonna do it. And it's like if Christ gave us command, i.e. to go out there and witness to people and we're not doing it, then we're not carrying forth the instructions he's given us. The same way in this case, the husband decided that he was self-sufficient. He didn't need any help. He was going to do it all himself. Even when he found out that she had let him down and she hadn't done anything, he still was talking about how he was going to get it done. So this was the problem with the Laodiceans. They felt that they was in a place where they didn't need any help from God. And that was, so when we talk about lukewarm Christians here, do we have a better understanding of what that means?
Yeah, but Michael, didn't she sort of, I don't know, to me, it seems that he wanted to do the work and had been compensated in a way to be able to do the work on. She should have followed through on what he had suggested and not mistrusted what he would be able to do. I mean, there was a lack of trust here. And that looks to me like you're letting the enemy in when you're not trusting. And I think he just took over and gave her more and more doubt. Then she took over the whole situation.
Well, she was guilty, Emma, in this case, because when we have an assignment, and to Harry's point, we said we're going to do it, we need to follow through. So she's clearly.
But he told her that he would do it. And why didn't she trust that he would do it?
Okay, well, he shouldn't have, but he should have never taken on that to try to do it all himself. That's the problem with the church here. Remember, the church figured that they can do it all themselves.
Yeah.
They didn't need any help.
The Laodicean church is the last of the 7 churches which the people ruled. The people was taking charge instead of acknowledging it was God that was able to keep them. That's where the main problem came in, was that people figured they could do it on their own. And today, we're living in that last church where people taking charge of their lives, thinking they're doing it on their own without God.
Give God credit.
Absolutely. So if there was one word you can use to describe what a lukewarm Christian is, what's the one word you would use? And he said it in this message here.
Useless.
Useless.
Mhm.
That's why it's such a bad position to be in if we are a lukewarm Christian, because we become useless to Christ. And that would be a poor indictment for him to tell us that we're useless, right? But that's what this church was at now. Any other comments or questions on that?
Well, I have a question, practical one. How do we prevent ourselves from becoming useless Christians?
That's a good question, Charles. Does anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, that's what I was going to try to expound on. If we're useful, it means we're being able to make God known to others and draw others onto the understanding of what Christ is about. But in many of the churches today, it's not about come to the church to find Christ. It's come to the church to be entertained. You know, you're entertained by the choir, you're entertained by whatever, goes on in the church it's another arena or another media for entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, but part of it is the key word is useless, right? How we become useful to Christ is to be under his will, right? If we're doing the things that he would have us to do, then we're useful. If we're doing our own thing, then we become useless. Right? So to me, it's being led by who are we being led by with the things that we do. In our day-to-day walk, who's leading us to do what we're doing? Are we just doing our own thing? Are we doing, is the Holy Spirit guiding us and telling us what we should be doing?
There's the key, right?
We should be taking.
Who's leading us? That's the key.
Right.
I go back to what Charles said. So what should we do to prevent?
How are you listening to Christ? I mean, are you praying daily to hear what he's saying to you? Are you being obedient when you hear from Christ? Are you studying his word? So to me, those are things that are required there, is that you got to be hearing from God.
Right. But are you studying the unadulterated word of God, or are you diluting it and making it your text, you know?
And the key thing here is us wanting to be led by Christ, right? Because
Right.
remember, the Laodiceans, they felt that they can do it on their own.
Yeah.
Are we reaching out to Christ for, God, what would you have me to do in that type of situation? Are we asking God for guidance?
Mike,
Yes.
I would also say that it boils down, I think, also to be doers of the word and not hearers only. And as you read through the New Testament, God all over, he's telling us, yes, after we have become saved, he's calling us to do good works. So, we are to be looking to the direction of the Holy Spirit as we're in the word, for what God wants us to do. He will be showing us things that he wants us to do to become useful Christian. I think this was like in the 1970s, there was this phrase was going around with a little band. I had one. What will Jesus do?
Yeah.
I never forget that.
Yeah.
I always, when I face certain situation, I always try to think about what will Jesus do? How will Jesus handle this situation? And I think when we're thinking in that direction, focusing him daily on what he expects of us, I think we will be useful, because he'll direct us in a way that he wants us to go.
How do you answer that question? What would Jesus do in those circumstances?
Yeah.
You don't answer the question. You let Jesus direct you.
Well, the whole
Spirit shows you. Yeah.
The whole point of that, I think, Charles, was to get you to pause, to think, how would Jesus deal with a certain situation?
And so that would lead us to the Bible, and we would actually be answering the question by looking at what Jesus did.
That would be one way to do it. Yep.
And listen, the Bible says that when Jesus walked in this world, he walked around doing good. He was healing all manner of diseases and was doing good. So I think that's what he expects of us, to be always finding a way to do good.
Well, I have a second video that's a little bit shorter than the first one. And Alan Parr, I like to listen to him, but he talks about lukewarm Christians, and maybe this will give you a different understanding here as well, Charles. So let's watch this other video. This is not as long, so I think we have time to get it in before we close out. Let me see. I got too many things open here. Hold on a second. Okay. I had things staged beforehand. Here we go. All right, let's try this now. Let me go back out. Okay, give me 1 second. I had things staged here. Here we go.
God is love, but there is one love that God hates. That's coming up next on The Beat. Hey everyone, my name is Alan Parr. Thank you all so much for tuning into The Beat. Today we're talking about what it looks like to be a worldly Christian, and it is my belief that one of, if not the biggest problem within Christianity today is we have too many Christians who profess to be Christians on the outside, but their lifestyle would prove otherwise. The Bible actually teaches that there are 4 different classes of people. There is the non-Christian, the baby Christian, the worldly Christian, and then the spiritual Christian. And so today, we want to focus on what a worldly Christian looks like. Speaking to Christians, James says that friendship with the world is hatred towards God. As a matter of fact, he goes on to say that when we love the world, that we are actually making ourselves an enemy of God. Jesus himself said to a church in the first century, he says, hey, I wish that you were either cold or hot. Now, he wasn't saying, I wish that you were saved or unsaved, but rather he was suggesting that cold water is good and useful, and so is hot water. But he says lukewarm water is useful for nothing, and actually when I taste it, I want to spit it out of my mouth. So what exactly does it look like to be a worldly Christian? Well, let's break this up into two categories. First, we have beliefs. Paul said in Romans 12, do not be conformed to the image of this world. In other words, do not let the world system that we are surrounded in squeeze us into our mold, but rather he says that we should be transformed by the renewing of our minds. A recent poll showed that 57% of all professing Christians believe that there is another way to get to heaven other than Jesus Christ. When Christians are too ashamed to take a stand for truth because it's unpopular, we are trending towards worldliness. When Christians believe that because our society has evolved, that it's okay for us to redefine marriage as being between two people of the same sex, or when Christians believe that it's okay for two consenting adults to live together before a marriage because it's financially feasible, we are trending towards worldliness. And Jesus says, whenever I taste this, I want to spit it out of my mouth. The reason why this angers God so much is because it reveals that we fear the rejection of men and value the opinions of men over the opinion of God. The second thing that characterizes a worldly Christian is not only their beliefs, but also their behavior. If you are living in consistent, perpetual sin, that does not necessarily make you a worldly Christian, but if your heart is no longer tender and remorseful and grieved over your sin, that could be a sign that you are trending towards worldliness. The Bible describes this as a seared conscience, comparing it to skin that is now burnt and insensitive to feeling. The second sign that a Christian could be trending towards worldliness is spiritual stagnancy. Paul said to the Corinthian church, he says, I could not speak to you as I would spiritual people. He said, I had to talk to you as though you belonged to the world. Why? Because since the time that they were saved, they had not yet progressed in their knowledge of God to get to the point where they were able to receive the deeper teachings that Paul had to give them. It's certainly normal and natural for all of us to go through high seasons and low seasons. But if there is a long period of time where we are not growing in our knowledge of God, our understanding of God, our prayer life, our Bible study, our service, our victory over sin, that could very well be a warning sign in our lives that we could be trending towards worldliness. Finally, John said that we could be trending towards worldliness if these three things are dominating our lives. First of all, he says the lust of the flesh. In other words, this is when we allow ourselves to be dominated with the strong desire to gratify our physical flesh and to do all sorts of different things that would make our flesh feel good. Second of all, he says the lust of the eyes, and this is when we lust after what we see, and as a result, our minds are consumed and dominated with this need to accumulate more wealth and to get more possessions so that we can have more rather than to give more. And then finally, he says the pride of life. And this is whenever we are absorbed with ourselves and do things to make ourselves look good in front of other people. We are driven by our need for attention, our need for success, and our need for recognition. And so rather than being negatively influenced by the darkness that we have in our society today, the Bible says that we as Christians should shine as lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. If you found this video helpful in any way, feel
good. Hey, yeah, that's Alan Parr. I like listening to Alan Parr. Okay, does anybody have any comments about what Alan said?
No, he was very clear.
Yeah. So he gives us, he does say a couple of things consistent with the previous messenger. One, lukewarm Christian has nothing to do about your salvation. So It's about whether we become useless in serving Christ. And then the other thing he mentioned is this gravitating towards worldly behavior, which is indicative that we become worldly Christians. So he named quite a few of those in terms of but that goes back to 1 John's second chapter that we read earlier. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh and the pride of life, those three things is dominating. It's indicative that we're becoming worldly Christians. So hopefully, you know, because for a long time, I'm gonna be honest with you all, I used to think that lukewarm Christian meant that somebody wasn't quite sure of their salvation.
Yeah.
But the true meaning of it is it has nothing to do with the salvation. It means that we have become useless to Christ. So that's the key takeaway for all of us here.
You know what? Those three sins that we called out: lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Those are things that we have to. Well, I say we. It's the royal we. I can only speak for myself. Have to fight on a daily basis. You can't give an inch to those three sins, or it'll come after you and turn you into a useless Christian. If any one of those three sins become dominant in your life, that's not a good thing.
Right.
That is correct.
But we have a lot of things that are thrown at us that we consume, and we don't know that we consume. When you look at the worldliness of our entertainers, which are, many of the entertainers are Christian entertainers. And if you look at Christian entertainers and how they dress and how they present themselves, they look just like the world. So like you begin to get kind of, you absorb it until you become callous to the way in which it's presented. And then you're accepting the worldly way. So
Well,
it kind of creeps in on you.
Okay, well, you kind of been judgmental there, Emma, but I
No,
think
she makes a very good point.
She was right on tape.
We start accepting things because society says it's okay, and then we become numb to it, and it's just okay. I mean,
and it becomes okay.
Living man, two people, a man and woman living together, we kind of accepted that now. We don't get upset or anything. We see that. Any number of things that are happening in the world, we as Christians, I think, are becoming numb to it because we're bombarded with it every day, and it just seems like a natural course of living.
Oh,
we
yeah,
we have to fight against it daily.
It's what we justify.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I thought what Emma was talking about, the way people dress and all that.
Well, it's true. That's part of it too. When you get a Christian entertainer who's supposedly talking about God, and then they're poured into something that is sensual. They come up as a sensual person. What are you going to do?
I agree with you, Ms. Emma. Only thing that I would say is we're getting to the point now. It's not just entertainment.
Yeah,
everywhere.
Well, not just entertainment, but I just gave that as an example.
Yeah, I know the kids look at the entertainment, but if you look in our house, if you look around how what we allow, you know, the kind of stuff as Christians, what we allow our children and other stuff to do. So I know you weren't just saying entertainment, but I'm just saying that we need to also look around. It's almost everywhere now that we got to watch our walk.
Okay, this has been a very good discussion. I hope you all got something out of the discussion. As I'm studying about being a lukewarm Christian, I got a better understanding myself. So,
but the thing you took away is that lukewarm Christian is still a Christian.
Yeah, and the point to make here too is if you are a lukewarm Christian, what are you going to do when you get into heaven?
How are you going to get in?
Well, no, you get in.
If he's going to spit you out of his mouth, how are you going to get in?
No,
you're in already, Emma. You're a lukewarm Christian. You're already in. You're just not going to have any stars in your crown.
Exactly.
I don't get
You're going to be in the basement.
Your house. Some people will have gold houses.
And you're going to be in the basement and you're going to say, well, at least I'm not burning.
Well, Emma.
You be in the basement.
Can you be a lukewarm Christian and get a crown?
No, I think Emma
We all will not be living in the same neighborhood.
I think Emma doesn't agree that these people are going to wind up in heaven, but
I don't think so.
But we just said, though, we just talked about this, is that lukewarm Christian is not about your salvation. That's not a question about the salvation.
But if God is spitting you out of his mouth, what does that mean?
Because you're not useful to
You're
him.
not used to
It
him.
means that you're no good and he can't use you, so you're out. You're either in or you're out. It's not, you can't be in
Emma,
and in.
Emma, if you have children, I have a sister that has a son, and I can say it here, and you know, because you prayed for Ronnie for many years. Ronnie, from he was like 14 years, Ronnie started breaking the law. Diana couldn't control him. Ronnie's life has been in and out of jail. But let me tell you something, you better not say anything about Ronnie in front of Diana. She loves him to
But
death.
she's not God, and she's not spit him out of
And
his
it's the
mouth.
same thing with God. He loves us, even when we're not doing
He
exactly
loves us, but he doesn't love
what we
sinners.
to do.
They're not
Emma,
sinners just because
Emma, I just hope you're not at the gate, okay?
Believe it.
Yeah.
Just remember, don't be lukewarm.
Well, I mean, it is a bad.
Don't come up to me lukewarm, you're not making it.
But Miss Emma, we all have sinned and come short.
But we're not going to have a heaven full of
There are things
lukewarm
in
people.
each of our lives on the Zoom that
don't
we have
have
come short. So you know what? No. Miss
No,
Emma,
we're not going to have a heaven
I
full of lukewarm
can't help
people.
it.
If
Okay,
God
let's,
spit out of his mouth, I don't want to be spit out of Jesus' mouth.
Mike, you succeeded in turning everybody here into hot Christians.
No, I thought we had gotten something out of this, but at least understanding that.
Either hot or you cold. To me, either hot or you cold. There ain't no
No in between with Mother Ellen.
Okay.
no in between.
Let's get. Do we have any prayer